Hi, I'm Jeremy Kellett, Director of Recruiting here at Oakley Trucking, and I'm your host for this podcast. This is episode 48. On today's podcast, I got a former owner-operator and heavy-duty truck specialist and a longtime friend, Mr. Mark Steck, with me today. We're going to talk about trucks, engines, transmissions, rear ends. We might even get into trading trucks. If you're going to keep your truck, when me and him get to talking, a lot of things can come out. So we're going to look forward to talking to him and visiting on trucks. I call this the Gearhead episode is what I'm thinking. You know, it's going to be talking about that kind of stuff. But before we get started, let's hear from Vickie Chastain on this week's Need to Know segment, sponsored by Aero Truck Sales.
When you get a trailer washout, it is very important that you let the trailer dry and check the trailer to make sure it's clean. Number 1, we don't want to contaminate a load. And 2, we don't want to pay for a washout that's not done properly. Taking the time to ensure that your trailer is ready for the next load is an important part of your job and one that should never be overlooked. I'm Vickie Chastain, and that's this week's Need to Know segment.
So, Aero Truck Sales, new sponsor of the Oakley Podcast. Be sure and give these guys a call and talk to them about what trucks they have. They've got a lot of trucks that are 5-year or newer, all makes and models, less than 400,000 miles on them. They specialize in first-time truck buyers. Good people that we've worked with for years. The best part probably was working with these guys at Aero Truck Sales out of Springfield, Missouri, is the service after the sale. They take care of you after you buy the truck. Love dealing with Keith Wilson at Aero Truck Sales out of Springfield, Missouri. They're running a promo right now. You buy a truck from Aero Truck Sales, Springfield, Missouri, you get a $250 fuel card and a CB radio. You mentioned that you heard it on the Oakley Podcast. Give them a call, Aero Truck Sales, 573-216-6047. Okay, let's get fired up on this episode. Call it the Gearhead episode. Now, I got Mr. Mark Steck joining me. How are you, Mark?
I'm doing well, Jeremy. Staying warm.
Hey, everybody needs to go back and listen to episode 21, because episode 21 is the episode me and Mark did, and it gives a great introduction of who Mark Steck is and why I've got him on here a second time, and why I'm always bugging him and asking him questions about motors, transmissions, rear ends, PTOs, all that stuff. He's the one that I use. So if you want to hear some of Mark's credentials, go back and listen to episode 21. It's real good. He's got a great history. We got a great history together on what we've been working together with, for years now, and it's been just a great team. So you can go back episode 21, listen to that. But Mark, I'm ready to dive into this thing. I'm looking forward to picking your brain and you just giving us some knowledge that you have on some of these trucks. The engines, the transmissions have been issues, and all this DEF problems that we've had too, and a lot of guys. And I want to give our listeners some good advice on maybe what they can do even as preventive maintenance. So I know we shared some topics here and questions of what to talk about. Where do you want to start?
I think it'd be a good idea if we broke down the different brand engines that are out there and the different sizes and torque ratings, so they could understand what is a good choice for them to be looking at as far as your application at Oakley. There's a lot of good brands out there. There's a lot of good companies. There's a lot of good engines. And just a brief overview to what to look for that'll work best in a bulk hauler application. Because you guys run heavy and you run hard.
Right.
So it's important to make sure they make a good decision whether they buy a new truck or a pre-owned truck.
So you specialize, I guess, in Detroit.
Detroit and Cummins.
Detroit and Cummins, that's right. All right. So that's fine with me. I think that's a great place to start, and what's best for these guys to look for.
So, and then Mack and Volvo, they have good engines. PACCAR now that's Kenworth and Peterbilt. They now have their own brand. And, of course, Navistar International, they have their own brand, and then they've been switching over to the Cummins. The whole idea is, everybody likes to stay with what they're comfortable with. Over the years, I've owned mostly Detroits. They've made me the most amount of money. The whole idea is to understand that no matter what brand you pick, there's the smaller engines, the 13-liter, and then the 15-liter, and then the 16-liter. Detroit now is the only company that does 16-liter. But when you start getting up into the 600 horsepower, 2050 pound-feet of torque, that engine is meant for short haul, heavy haul, which means they don't last as long as the 15-liters. The smaller engines, the 13-liters, they're more of a regional engine. They can be used in your application. Just be aware that they're designed for that less than 100,000 miles a year. So they're not designed to last as long as the 15-liters. And you're going to work them harder. You're going to save weight, though. So, in a weight-sensitive application, a lot of times a 13-liter engine with a smaller sleeper, that's how you can run the heavy loads. So it's just something to be aware of, that, a 15-liter engine spec'd properly doesn't work as hard, and it's right in that wheelhouse for that bulk hauling application where you're going to be running. What's your average length of haul? How many miles do typically the guys go between loading and unloading?
Typically, our guys are going to load and unload every day. So, whether that's a 4, 5, 600-mile trip, but every day they're typically going to load and unload every day, and they're going to haul the weight, gross and close to 80,000 pounds as they can get.
Yeah, so a properly spec'd 15-liter or a properly spec'd 13-liter in that application works well. And then when they're looking at it, over the years, manufacturers have, engines have been what they call downsped. Back in the day when I was making truck payments and hauling bulk, it was nothing to run down the road at 1,1800 RPM. The engines today are designed to run, that 1,250 to 1,500 RPM. So a lot of them have gone to what they call direct drive transmissions. And that limits you on top speed. And if you're going to run heavy, you really don't get the acceleration that you're used to. They work well, but they're designed for, kind of flat terrain, not maxed out gross weight. So just be aware that when you go look at a truck and they tell you that the rear end is a 274 and it's got a direct drive transmission, it's not going to run like a truck with an overdrive with a 342 rear ends. Now, there's quite a few people on XM radio that'll disagree with me, but my experience has been when the guys come in and they've bought direct drive transmissions and they want to run the hills heavy, it doesn't run like they want it to.
So now, is that the direct drive transmission? I don't guess I know exactly what you're talking about when you say that, but I'm not a mechanical guy like that. But that's not, you're not talking automatic transmission.
No, but now you can get an automated transmission in direct drive or overdrive. To make it real simple, last gear in a direct drive transmission is 1-to-1 ratio. In an overdrive transmission, last gear is typically like 0.78 to 1, 0.75 to 1. You get a little bit less reduction, so that you can put it basically, in old term technology, put it in a big hole and cruise. That you can stretch it out, it'll run, and then you, like on your 13 speeds and your 18 speeds, you split a gear and you drop it into direct, and that way you're not shifting as much. There's proper applications for both, but typically the tanker bulk hauler guys that I talk to that have bought direct drive transmissions, they wish they would have stayed with the overdrive.
Gotcha. Okay. I know it reminds me of a guy you told me about this not that long ago and I get this with a lot of guys. They want the big motor, 18-speed, big everything, because I guess they feel like grossing 80,000 pounds is what they need to do that. But it was one of our guys that I had sent to you, and you told him he didn't need all that, right?
Yeah, he wanted 2050 torque and 600 horsepower. That's a heavy haul engine.
Yeah, right.
Now, yeah, that's a heavy haul engine. And they kind of don't, they like to run heavy. They typically don't run that good when you're not putting them up over 100,000 pounds. Now, 550 horse, 1850 torque with an overdrive transmission, he's going to get the feel that he wants. He's definitely going to get the feel that he wants. Just remember, bigger torque means bigger drive lines, bigger transmissions. So if you buy a truck with a 1650 pound-feet torque engine, you're going to have a transmission and a drive line rated at 1650 torque. If you buy an 1850 torque engine, you're going to have a bigger transmission, you're going to have bigger drive lines, you're going to have more weight. And then when you do go to repair things like U-joints and carrier bearings, you're going to be paying extra for it, and you're going to be carrying all that extra weight. One of the things, when you go looking to buy used trucks, the Navistar engines, the international engines that ran the EGR instead of DEF, we've seen a lot of failures on them. You can buy them real cheap, and you can, when you go to sell them, you sell them real cheap too, and they don't live a long life. PACCAR has gotten better at their engines, but it was like anything when they first brought the PACCAR engine out. And I'm fortunate here in this shop here where I work, we work on everything. I'm in the sales department, but I hang out in the shop all the time. We call this the Gearhead edition for a reason. And we've got technicians out there that came over from PACCAR, and they work on them all. And they've explained to me the weaknesses of all the brands. And the early PACCAR engines did have some longevity issues. And with their telling me this, I've gone and called on a lot of fleets that had the PACCAR early engines, and they're now running Detroits with Western Stars and Freightliners. So the techs gave me some good leads, and it paid off because they were right for the problems they have. So just be aware of what you buy. The Navistar engines and the early PACCAR engines are prone to service failures.
Good information, that especially coming from a mechanic. I mean, you listen to those guys that work on them all the time, and they work on all the different brands of engines, and you can get some good input from them on what to expect. So good information, man. How about this? This is geared a little bit more towards Oakley and our owner-operators, but the automatic transmissions and being PTO capable, that has thrown a wrench into things.
Right.
And I've had to make several calls to you about that because we're running into more problem. I wouldn't say problems, just different applications that we got to figure out on these automatic transmissions. Can you give us your light on that, on what you think's going on, and maybe what we need to look for?
So what I'll do is briefly, I'd like to explain. There's a true automatic transmission, and in trucks, the only true automatic is an Allison. Then you have the automated transmissions. They're manual gearboxes that have been automated. They don't have gear shifts and they don't have a clutch pedal, but they shift gears and they have an actuated clutch, and it's done by computer and air actuators and computer modules. So that's why in PACCAR doesn't have their own transmission yet, so they run the Eaton, and then Volvo and Mack, they have their version. The Volvo transmission was the beginning, the I-Shift, amazing transmission. And then Eaton has come out, that it's called the Ultra Shift Plus. They have perfected that. I've got guys going down the road with that transmission, 200,000 pounds plus, no problems. I mean, they're running in 100-degree heat, 125 feet long escorts, running heavy and wide, and the transmission works great. And then now Detroit has come up in the last few years. It's been, 5 or 6 years now. They have their DT12. That started out strictly as an on-highway, not PTO capable, and now they've perfected it and proven it, and now they're bringing out models for the heavier vocational ones. Whatever brand automated transmission you buy, you need to make sure you get in writing from the company that you buy it from that it is PTO capable. For example, the Detroit the first ones, the DT12s, you couldn't put a PTO on them, ever. Then they came up with you could order it PTO capable, but if it wasn't ordered PTO capable, there was no way to go back. There's no way to retrofit. Now the Detroit has come up with, and it was a rear mount PTO, now they've come up with the traditional bottom mounts and the rear mount. The newer versions that are coming out this year, they're going to be as good or better, in my opinion, than the Eaton. All of them, though, have PTO capability issues. I deal with a company that builds cotton modules. So, you see the big beds where they go out in the field and they grab the cotton modules and suck them in.
Right.
They cannot use the Volvo transmission because it won't work for them in gear the way they want to. And they definitely can't use the Detroit transmission up until the next couple months they're starting to come out. So the Eaton is the one that is the most versatile. And then when you get a Detroit or you get an iShift, Volvo or Mack, just make sure that you're positive in writing you can put a PTO on it.
And I don't know that everybody knows that, because we've ran into that here. We have owner-operators working here now that went and bought a truck, so excited to get a truck. They get here, and we can't put a PTO on it for them to
Correct.
keep pulling an end dump. And which they didn't think anything about that when they bought the truck, which is, we all probably should have, but it became a problem. So they had to go to the hopper division. So, and it started, I remember it starting a few years ago with the Detroit transmission that you were telling us about, because that was a problem at a certain, I think it was a certain year model or something there, where if it was that Detroit transmission, we could not put a PTO on it. And now it had to be a later year model, I think it was, Steck, that we can put a
Correct.
PTO on it. But I'm like you got to find out before you buy the truck. You want to know what it can do and what the transmission is capable of.
And then to throw a bigger wrench into it, there's programming. For example, the automated transmissions, typically they're programmed with the switch and the programming where the PTO only works when the truck is stationary and the brakes are locked. So when you go to put a PTO on a transmission that needs to work with a frameless end dump, you need to have that PTO capable when your brakes are released and the transmission is in gear. So the DT12s up until now, this next year, coming 2021, 2022 model years, you couldn't get the transmission to have the PTO engaged when the transmission was engaged. On the Eaton transmission, you had to make sure you had the right switch in the dash that didn't have what they call a park brake interlock, and you need to make sure that it's set up to where the PTO will work when you have the transmission in gear. And typically you engage the PTO when it's in neutral, then you put the transmission in gear, and then it'll work. And then there's two different types of PTOs. There's one style that it's like the old style manual transmission. You got to push on the clutch before you put the PTO in gear. Well, on these, you got to push on the brake pedal and stop the transmission from turning, and you do that with the brake pedal, and then you can put the PTO in gear. Otherwise, you grind it. And then there's another setup to where you can flip the switch on without having to do that, and it doesn't grind. And that's where a good upfitter, a good PTO specialist can get you what you need. And you just make sure that the switch in the truck is properly programmed and the proper switch. If you're buying a new truck today or a late model used truck that does not have the PTO switch in the dash, be prepared to pay a lot extra to put a PTO switch in the dash, because you don't just put an airline in it anymore. You have to program with the engine to let it know what's going on.
We've run into that, Mark, with with Volvos. We've had several guys buy Volvos, and they had to go back to the Volvo dealer and get the motor program to let it know that there's going to be a PTO on the transmission, if that makes sense. But
Correct.
Yeah, and that was an unexpected shoot. I don't remember, $800,000 that the guys, got charged
At least.
for that. Yeah, for that. So
At least.
yeah, it's a little surprise there, a little frustrating part of it, but they've all gotten a little more complicated with the automatic transmissions and stuff. But the good thing about it is it's still working. We're still able to put PTO's wet kits on there, blowers on there, and it still function right. So that's the good part.
Absolutely. And the advantages of the automated transmissions outweigh the disadvantages. Everybody I know that I've sold a truck to, either small fleets, medium-sized fleets, municipalities, I do a lot of vocational stuff where the guys are always at job sites. There's always equipment and machinery on the trucks. I've been fortunate to get involved in the complicated stuff down here. Every one of them, whether it's a young guy that's only been driving a few years or a guy like me that's pushing retirement and has no desire to quit working, the minute they get in an automated transmission with no clutch pedal and no gear shift and they get used to it, they don't ever want to go back to a gear shift. And you don't tear up drive lines. We've got a dump truck fleet here. They've been in business 60 years. They've got guys that have been working for them 25, 30 years. We sold them the first automated 8LL, so it's a 10-speed with 2 little holes, 5 years ago. They just started changing clutches last fall. Historically, when a truck was a year and a half old, it got new clutches, new driveline, new U-joints. Usually within a couple of years, they were working on the rear ends. They're not blowing up rear ends. They're not blowing up drivelines, nothing. They're just working.
So you're a proponent of the automatic transmission then, it sounds like.
Absolutely.
Yep.
The day is going to come where it is going to be rare to see a gear shift and a clutch pedal in a truck.
Well,
it's coming.
And it it makes sense with the fuel mileage. That's increased fuel mileage. That's where a lot of money's at too. But is that because this automatic transmission, is that raised the price on new trucks? Is that one of the biggest reasons? Or I guess part of it's probably that DEF, isn't it, Mark?
When you say raise the price, I mean, why are they going to the automated?
Well, it just hit me that I know that a lot of the new truck prices seem to be higher, the 160, 170, and I just thought maybe that automatic transmission had a lot to do with that probably.
Prices have come down on them. They add, a few $1,000s to the price of the truck.
Okay.
But the cost of the truck over 5 to 6 years, it pays for itself right away.
Yeah. Let's talk
Trucks
about.
Are just expensive.
They are very expensive. I know we have a lot of guys buying new trucks right now, and I think they do it end of the year, first of the year. But we have a lot of guys buying brand new trucks, and they're up there. They're expensive, but well worth it if you ask me. We were talking about this. You ought to go back and listen to last episode. I talked to the tax service guys, ATBS, and man, we talked about the advantages of buying a brand new truck and the depreciation and all that, and it was definitely good information. Yeah.
I was just going to say, you buy a truck with an automated transmission, the engine programming and the transmission programming, they can be set on economy, they can be set on performance, they can be set so you can't manually operate them. There's all kinds of things you have to be aware of in programming to make it comfortable for you and your application. What you guys do, you need to make sure that you can operate that transmission the way you want it to. And it's all in engine and transmission programming. Progressive shifting, you don't want that thing as you're going along to, if they're put in progressive shifting economy mode, that's for a fleet application that really keeps the fuel mileage up there, but you are unable to do things you want the truck to do, and the truck is loaded heavy, and you're in a situation where you need to get with the program.
Let's talk a little bit about these truck maintenance on these DEF systems. A lot of truck drivers do not like these DEF systems, and they have caused a lot of problems in the past since they came out with them, and certain ones are worse than other ones. You still see people trying to delete trucks. We still run across that, but these DEF systems are here to stay. It sure sounds like. So we need to give our listeners the best way to service them, I think. And I wanted to get your thoughts on that and maybe what you could tell them.
On the DEF systems, you're correct. They're after treatment devices. There's three purposes or three functions in an after treatment device: to collect soot and burn it off, to collect ash, which is from the oil. The soot is from burning fuel. The ash is from oil, and the NOx, the haze, and that is gotten rid of with the diesel exhaust fluid, the DEF. So soot is carbon. It is a function of combustion. So the more you can avoid cold starts, which means block heaters, Webasto's, if you've got an APU, make sure that you're keeping your engine warm with either a block heater or the ones that circulate coolant. So when you start it, back in the old days, you'd start up a new truck and it would smoke like crazy. Well, that doesn't happen anymore because it's being trapped in the after treatment device. Yeah. And then it has to be burned off by regeneration, either passive or parked. And that's where you burn the soot off using fuel and elevated exhaust temperatures. Then you have the ash collected from the oil. So make sure you use low ash oil. CK4 is the designation. And then you have the NOx, which is gotten rid of through the SCR part of it, the DEF, and that's what gets rid of the haze. So the whole idea is air filters. You have your number one line of defense with after treatment devices is clean air filters. The cleaner your air coming in, the better, the longer it's going to live. Okay. Idling, things like that, that's what builds soot.
Well, and isn't that crazy that, truck drivers, they idle their trucks all the time. I mean, you have to idle at night to stay warm or stay cool. And it's
Correct.
Crazy that they, didn't think about that and put this system on. But that's part of it. And, now that's why most people get an APU when they get their truck. But this, the air filters, I mean, is it as simple as that to prevent a lot of the problems with that? And how often do you say change that air filter, Mark?
So, and we'll go back to the idling real quick.
Okay.
And then we'll go to the air filter. First of all, the early after treatment devices, let's face it, the government forced this on the trucking industry. Well, the trucking industry, the engineers, they're smart guys. They have gotten better at designing the after treatment devices, and they know trucks need to idle, and that's why the programming has gotten really good to where they use less and less fuel when they idle. And then they have programming in them to help the engine idle up just a little bit when it's sensing carbon's building in there, so it builds up a little bit of heat to keep that from plugging up the after treatment device. So, and then your air filters, typically, if you have under the hood air filters, you have a little restriction device that'll show on there whether or not you're getting restriction. And the whole idea is check your air filters often. If you're running bulk hauling and you're in a sandy, dusty situation, you may have to change your air filters before you change your oil, depending on how much dust you're running. And you want to change them. You don't want to clean them, because blowing air through them from inside out pokes holes in the filter, and now you're actually getting more dirt in the engine than if you just left it alone.
Okay, good note there.
Yeah, and then what we find is if you're having to top off your fluids, your coolant, or you're topping off your oil because you're burning oil or you're losing coolant, more than if it's going out the exhaust through the exhaust system, it's plugging up your after treatment device. So you have to find where that coolant and where that oil is going. You've got to eliminate that because it's getting trapped in the after treatment device,
which is going to cause problems down the road.
Oh yeah, if you've got a bad injector that's overfueling, if you've got an engine that's starting to use oil, if you've got a head gasket leaking, if you've got an EGR cooler that is dumping antifreeze into the exhaust system, you're going to have after treatment device. It's called upstream problems. So good preventive maintenance. One thing I've learned, and we've really helped quite a few small fleets down here, is get yourself a little plug-in diagnostic device. There's a company called Diesel Laptop, and I'm not affiliated with them whatsoever. I just had a bunch of companies go to them and they have handheld devices that are real reasonable, a couple $100, programming on them. Then you can see your codes, and then you can see where your parameters are set. And that helps you avoid, all this check engine lights on. Well, what does it mean? You got to go to the dealership. Well, if you just plug in, there's this one little device. It's a Bluetooth Mini. You get the software for free. You put it on your phone, and you plug in, and you look and see what's going on right away.
I'll be dang. That's a good idea. You were telling me that one time, I think, about Detroit, or somebody was coming up with that. I don't remember if it was an app or something.
And you can get it. Diesel Laptops, they got a couple different devices that are pretty good. When you buy a used truck, you go in, you want to know the maintenance and history on the truck. Well, make sure they've worked on the after treatment device, and if they haven't, be prepared. Because if you buy a 500,000 mile truck that's never had the after treatment device cleaned and maintained, you're going to do it.
It's coming.
You're going to do it. And then, it's just the nature of the trucks these days. You have your engines, you have your transmissions, you have your suspensions, your rims, you have the after treatment device. And you're correct, they aren't going away. They have gotten much better. I mean, I have trucks the last couple of years I've sold, and they run in dirty environments down here, hard-working trucks. We don't see them in the shop like we used to unless they start having dirty air filters, or they've got something going on where they're getting fuel and oil or water into the exhaust system that doesn't belong there.
Right. Well, that's all good information right there. I think, for our listeners to take warning, to know some of these things. It could be simple as an air filter could keep your DEF system going for a long time. And, I guess most of these guys, and a lot of our guys, trade trucks. And I don't know, to me personally, of course, I'm not a truck driver, never have been, but I would think running a new truck or trading trucks every 3 or 4 years, especially that has this DEF system, is the way to go. Because, used to, it was you buy a truck and you're going to keep it forever. And we have a lot of guys that these older trucks. Now, I'm not talking about buying the pre-emission trucks. I know those guys, you want to keep those trucks. A lot of them do. But I'm talking about if you buy a truck nowadays with this system, exhaust fluid system on it, then I would want to trade it every so often. I'm just to give you an idea here, Steck, I own a 2016 GMC pickup with the HD, the 2500, and it's got the Duramax in it, and it's got the DEF system. And I am constantly debating whether to get rid of it or not, because I'm one of those guys that I buy a truck and I keep it. I don't get rid of it. The last one I bought, I gave it to my son's driving it now. So I bought this one to keep. But having this system on this truck now, on this pickup now, is making me think I don't know if it's a truck that can last as long as I want it to. You think that's a good mentality for these owner operators, with these trucks, is to trade them every few years?
Interesting question you bring up. I bought my first truck in 1978. I sold my last truck in 2004. And I never kept a truck longer than 3 years. Because 4 years, take it back, 4 years max. I had a good accountant when I first started. He said, you want to make money with it, or do you want to work on it? I said, I want to make money with it. He said, well, you bought a new truck. Here's how much you put down. How much are you going to set aside? So at the end of 3 or 4 years, you've got a down payment, and you don't need the equity in your truck to keep you out of payment trouble. He says the equity in your truck will just be added money that you'll have in your reserve. So, and my mother was an accountant for Walgreens, and she was the same way. She said, figure out what your trade cycle is and do it. And it's kept me out of trouble. Then over the years, I started selling trucks, and I've seen guys make money both ways, keep them forever or trade them. So it's what you want to do. I personally recommend buy a new truck. If you've got 500,000 mile warranty on it, sell it and you got 450,000 miles on it. That way, whoever you trade it to, it's still got warranty and they like it. It gives you more value. And most of your maintenance is planned unless you tear something up. And then you've got your depreciation, you've got your planned maintenance, and you've got a truck that is pretty reliable. So here's what happened. Before we did this, you're really concerned about after treatment devices, and I understand completely. So I went out to the shop, and again, I'm real proud of the guys I work with. This company is filled with guys that just have all kinds of experience. And I went out to our service manager, and then we have this one technician that I really respect. He's helped me put together a lot of special projects. I said, what are the common causes of after-treatment device failures? And they both said same thing, air filters, first thing. Then they said oil contamination. I said, what do you mean oil contamination? They said oil getting past the rings into the after-treatment device. Okay. Then they said insufficient heat in the exhaust. I said, what causes that? They said leaks in your exhaust system, boost leaks, which means boosts. You've got a charge air cooler, you've got a turbocharger that pressurizes air and pushes it into the engine. Well, if you're losing boost, you're going to start losing heat in your engine. And then running light loads, which you don't have to worry about. High idle, that happens. But I'm talking high idle, where they let them run all day long. They drive around a job site, 15, 20 mile an hour, and then they park them at night. Not like where you idle to sleeping, but then you run heavy for 500 miles. And then upstream failures, injectors that are overfueling, turbochargers that are weak because they're getting old, your charge air cooler because it's got a leak in it, coolant in the oil, which then it allows the oil to get past the rings, which can be caused by head gaskets, liners, EGR coolers. And they said also they're seeing on the new trucks, you don't want to top off the oil. You get a new truck, and typically you don't add oil in between oil changes, maybe a gallon. But they learned that the old school way of making sure you kept it full is how you use oil. In other words, they check their oil in the morning and it's half down. It's a half a gallon down, so they top it off. Well, if they had left that alone and waited till it got down to the gallon mark, it could have been 2 or 3 weeks before they added a gallon of oil in versus adding a half a gallon of oil in every few days. The engines find their sweet spots, and then they stay there. So if you're topping off your fluids, let your oil run down to the add mark. And if you're losing coolant, things like that, figure out where it's going. But they just hit me. They just rattled it off. I mean, they just both looked at each other and smiled. This is what we see causes this.
Yeah, they knew. They'd worked on enough of them to know.
Yeah, and then when you go to get your diesel particulate filter cleaned on the Detroits, you don't clean them. You exchange them. Detroit has an exchange program. They do not recommend you clean them. They do a liquid clean, and they have an exchange program. And then the other manufacturers, they do what's called a bake and a blow. They heat it up, and then they blow it out. There's backyard ones, and there's good ones. Make sure you go to a reputable company that knows how to treat and clean and remanufacture after treatment devices.
Going to the wrong place can cost you a lot of money, so you definitely want to go to somebody that knows something about it.
Yeah, and downtime, Jeremy. Downtime is more expensive than maintenance.
Isn't it, though? We see so many guys that have downtime, and, it's unfortunately, it's not something that you, as an owner-operator, that you want very often, but it's going to happen. We see too much of it, and it's going to happen. You're going to have some downtime. You got to be prepared for that also. Well, good stuff, Mark. Man, I tell you, really good stuff. Good information for our owner-operators, any owner-operator to listen to this stuff, especially if they know their stuff about engines, transmissions, and diesel exhaust fluid. I mean, this is very helpful information for them to make some good decisions, so they can be profitable. That's the whole deal, is how, make an owner-operator successful. That is the plan. That's what Oakley Trucking wants to do, is to help guys do that, and that's what Mark Steck wants to do. We want guys to be successful out there on the road, because we need more owner-operators. We need more guys buying trucks and becoming owner-operators. That's how this company is made, and we believe in that plan. So, good stuff. Anything else you'd like to add, Steck?
I'd just like to close with trucks. Like we've been saying, trucks have gotten more complicated. Just remember, when you do preventive maintenance, back in the day, it was just, you lube the truck, you change the oil, you change the filters, and away you go. That's not today's case. PMs are not just lube, oil, and filter anymore. You have to do alignment schedules. You have to check your wheel end deflection, your rear ends. You have to look at your cross members. You got to look at your wiring. Wiring is extremely complicated in today's trucks. You have to keep wiring in good shape. You could be getting ghost codes just because you've got a harness that's got a problem. So there's A, B, C, and D services. Really learn to inspect your truck, either someplace reputable or learn how to do it yourself if you're someone that really likes to do that.
Definitely. Always inspecting and pre-maintenance on trucks. That's the life of them, life of a lot of things. Well, listen, I appreciate it, Mark, hanging with me today and getting good information to everybody. I appreciate our listeners, too, tuning in to YouTube that we're on now. I'd appreciate it if you guys would subscribe to that and like us on YouTube, and anything to help us get the word about Oakley Trucking out to other people. That's what our goal is to use this as a source of information for owner-operators, especially Oakley owner-operators and their families. That's why it's called the Oakley Podcast, Trucking Business and Family. So be sure and check us out. Watch our social media. We got a lot of new things happening in our social media now, and appreciate our sponsor, Aero Truck Sales, for this episode. Thank you for sponsoring Oakley Trucking. And other than that, we'll talk to everybody next week. Appreciate it.